NSA hosts conference on support to law enforcement. They hosted a cryptanalytics support to law enforcement conference. Okay, so this is hosted in the past tense, so this should actually give us some details. This conference had the distinction of being the first time all 5 SIGINT partners met to discuss support to law enforcement partners. This should be very interesting, because we don't often hear about spying in a domestic law enforcement context.
True.
But there's been a lot happening in New Zealand around revealing GCSB's role in support to law enforcement.
Absolutely.
Law enforcement representation included the FBI, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, UK's National Technical Assistance Centre, and they didn't even bother to list the Australian or New Zealand ones. The shared goal of the conference participants was to develop a true understanding of the needs of their law enforcement and SIGINT partners. So all of those law enforcement agencies are customers of the NSA. The first 2 days involved briefings and discussions focused on legal guidelines and authorities, law enforcement needs, SIGINT partners' procedures for accepting and fulfilling requests for technical assistance. The rest of the conference focused on discussions highlighting equity sharing concerns between the SIGINT partners and law enforcement. Equity sharing concerns. What are their equity sharing concerns? Well, it was clear that the SIGINT partners were interested in supporting law enforcement. Protecting our SIGINT equities was an extremely important issue, and discussions on how to protect those equities followed. So this ties back into the parallel reconstruction stuff that we were talking about in the last episode, where often these law enforcement agencies are receiving information from the spies that they can't confirm or use in a court of law. They can't confirm where they got it, and therefore they can't use it in a court of law. So what they do is they take what they already know and they find other ways to prove it. And then they, let me try and think of some really banal example. Like the NSA says Susie's sack of gold is in her safe, and the law enforcement agency says, well, we can't go to the court and say we know that Susie's sack of gold is in her safe. Therefore, what we would do is, in some really dodgy case, plant some drugs in Susie's house so that we can go and raid her house and then happen across her safe in the course of executing our search warrant. And then, if you want to play it straight, then maybe they would, find out that Susie has some stolen DVD in her house and therefore, use that as a pretext to discover that she has a safe with a sack of gold in it, and then can go running to the court and say, well, this is how we know that she had the sack of gold, because we happened to cross it in the course of our ordinary investigation into the stolen DVDs.
Exactly.
That's parallel reconstruction, and that's been happening all of the time, and that is not okay. It is not okay for them to exploit SIGINT and then pretend that they never had it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is interesting that the NSA is saying that the spy agencies are wanting to protect I want to know what this equities means. Equity sharing concerns, and then protecting our SIGINT equities. They've got that twice in one paragraph. 3 times. Discussions on how to protect those equities followed. Through these open and frank discussions, it was very apparent that all partners go to great lengths to protect our very important and most sensitive assets.
And they say our, not their. It's just their, it's our.
It's also interesting because this seems to be almost a direct violation of the whole information sharing principle. Like Transformation 2.0 was all about sharing the intelligence out between the agencies. But this equity thing, I really want to know, is that between first tier and second tier parties? Or is it between spies versus law enforcement? And equity sounds suspiciously like there's money or
that's a financial
or some value. Equity sharing is, we've just been sent this tip. Equity sharing is another name for shared ownership or co-ownership. It takes one property, more than one owner, and blends them to maximize profit and tax deductions. Typically, the parties find a home and buy it together as co-owners, but sometimes they join to co-own a property one of them already owns.
Yeah. So it's like having a percentage in something as well, is another way to phrase it. But
I'm really interested to know what the financial implications are.
well, at the very least, it's talking about, I believe, some sort of intelligence as a financial product for the millionth time that we've seen.
Yeah, for the millionth time, because we know that customers pay money.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah, it's just another, yeah.
So is it how much money do they pay, or how much do they get for their money? Somehow it stinks of all tying into money somehow.
Definitely.
I don't know how they have capitalized this, but somehow they have. And I think maybe if we just keep studying, we'll eventually come across the key to understanding it. Protect our very important and most sensitive assets. See, they're not talking about like protecting from a privacy perspective at all. They're talking about protecting from a business perspective.
Asset, yeah, money, for sure. And it goes back as well to what you've described before as far as like tiered intelligence sharing. Once again, they're wanting to protect their larger piece of the pie at the expense of everybody else, it sounds like.
Well, when they say protect our very important and most sensitive assets, it seems to be the sources.
Yeah, that's true.
Assets in an intelligence context usually means sources, but all of that talk about equity, they're not talking about sharing sources. That's definitely has some kind of value content, financial value.
For sure.
Yeah, be it short or long term. As a result of the conference, the attendees agreed upon a mutual set of guiding principles to shape and facilitate our relationship with the law enforcement community. Ultimately, all participants left the conference with a greater appreciation for each other's commitment to supporting law and blah, 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 blah. Confidence in our procedures to protect each other's equities for the 5th time in this document. That was the word equities.
That's amazing.
And I mean, understanding as to how the laws of each country works in that protection.
And the thing is too that we've seen, as you said, we've seen so much reference to intelligence in financial terms, but I don't think I've seen equity come up in a document specifically before, and much less like 5 times.
Now, other factor here is that the New Zealand equivalent of the FBI would be the New Zealand SIS, and the New Zealand SIS is supposed to be restricted by its charter to only spy on New Zealand citizens. So that's a really interesting factor in this, is that these law enforcement agencies are domestic. They are internal to the countries that they represent. And most of those countries in 2004 would not be supposed to be spying on their own citizens. So for this cooperation, it should be the FBI investigating someone outside of the United States, right? For them to be, I mean, otherwise what they're saying is that these domestic agencies this may in fact be a confirmation that they were receiving and accessing signals intelligence on their own citizens well before they were supposed to be.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And that's really potentially huge, I think.
Now I'm trying to remember, because somewhere there was, in the 88 plus citizens that had been illegally targeted by the GCSB in New Zealand, somewhere there was dates. And I thought it was 2007 that was the earliest case of them doing it. So I think this 2004 could be really significant. Definitely. The fact that the domestic law enforcement agency was a customer of the GCSB and receiving signals intelligence in 2004 would be really interesting. Definitely. If they're doing it because they're investigating foreigners on our soil, then that would be in line with their charter. But if they were at all receiving data on New Zealand citizens, that is a giant freaking no-no.
Definitely.
Giant no-no. Tip. I think equity sharing is using the other's assets or facilities in ways that are illegal to be done on their own citizens by proxy. Now, see, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So then they are openly planning that they will have another agency supply the data to the domestic law enforcement agency of another country.
Now, how would we confirm that? Because I think
that's epic amounts of collusion. Well, the fact that they were doing that, there's many cases of. So we know for a fact that when NSA, when FBI or whatever wanted information on an American citizen, they would go to GCHQ.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what happened with the 88 cases in New Zealand. The GCSB referred them to the NSA. They referred their own citizens to the NSA as targets. They were target referrals. They had the NSA spy on New Zealand citizens. And the funny thing is they thought that doing that made their hands clean, but actually it made them dirty. It made them twice as dirty.
Absolutely. Yeah, so to think that this is pushing back the date on that type of thing so early is really amazing. We're coming across a lot.
I think the fact that this was 2004 is one of the most significant factors in this document.
Definitely.
And I think that we have a lot more to learn about that word equities.
Absolutely. I'm hoping it comes up again so that we can compare it. I'm hoping it comes up again so that we can compare it and see if it's used similarly. I'm 99% sure, you know, obviously it's a financial term, but I want to, as you said, I want to know what they're defining it, what they're referring to financially with that. So